Hello there. Each year, Digital Futures presents the Mark Cousins Theory Award for exceptional work in the domain of theory. The award is named in honor of Mark Cousins, longtime Director of General Studies and head of the graduate program in Histories and Theories at the Architectural Association. The award celebrates unconventional approaches to theory that seek to rethink the very notion of theory. Never has this rethinking been more pressing than in what Brian Massumi calls a post-normative condition of today. And I quote, "In such a regime of normation, rather than extracting the norm from naturally occurring variations in the social field, the norm is prefixed. It overhangs the social field in sovereign conceit, swooping down on it to overcode bodies. It is an ideal that wraps itself around bodies' behavior to imprint its form on them. It functions in the manner of a mold. Its ideal form is applied to life, forcing conformity to its frame. In today's post-normative condition, there is a return to the ur-norm and its forced conformity. The monarchical form of the norm returns as an archaism with a contemporary function." End quote. So, my name is Andrej Radman, TU Delft architecture theorist, and on behalf of the Digital Futures jury, it is my great honor to present the 2025 Mark Cousins Theory Award to the sociologist and architectural theorist Albena Yaneva. Professor Yaneva is quintessentially European, born in Bulgaria, educated in France, based in the UK, and currently teaching in Italy. I began by referring to the vector of her own anthropogenesis, or her processes of subjectification, because it seems only appropriate. It is entirely conceivable that her sensibility would have been radically different had she remained immobile. I'm, of course, referring to her understanding of architecture not as a collection of static objects, but as practices, processes, and socio-material networks. Albena first came to my attention through a paper she co-wrote with her great mentor, Bruno Latour, provocatively entitled, "Give me a gun and I will make all buildings move." As we shall see, this is a very different gun from what one might initially imagine. Let me quote the opening paragraph of that essay. "Our problem is just the opposite of Etienne Jules Maré's famous inquiry into the physiology of movement. Through the invention of his photographic gun, he wanted to arrest the flight of a bird so as to be able to see in a fixed format every single successive freeze frame of a continuous flow of flight, the mechanism of which had eluded all observers until his invention. What we need is the reverse, according to her. The problem with buildings is that they look desperately static. It seems almost impossible to grasp them as movement, as flight, as a series of transformations. Everybody knows, especially architects, of course, that a building is not a static object, but a moving project, that even once it has been built, it ages, is transformed by its users, modified by what happens inside and outside. We know this, but the problem is that we have no equivalent of Maré's photographic gun." End quote. In the meantime, Albena has been producing numerous quote-unquote guns through her prestigious academic positions and in the format of a series of influential publications, such as ranging from Ethnography of Design, 5 ways to make architecture political, Architecture Abechoid, to name only a few. Although the reference to the gun is more charged today than it was back in 2008, it remains an apt extended metaphor for what she understands as a new task for architecture theory, namely, and I quote, "to find the equivalent of Maré's photographic gun and tackle the admittedly daunting task of inventing a visual vocabulary that will finally do justice to the quote-unquote thingly nature of buildings, as opposed to their tired, old, objective nature, end quote. I'm confident that Mark Cousins, whose name this award bears, would appreciate a scholar who studies architecture as a socio-material practice, not merely as a built form, a researcher applying ethnographic methods to architectural processes, a transdisciplinary thinker committed to dissolving rigid boundaries between social theory, design, and material practice. And finally, someone who insists that architecture cannot be fully understood without studying the processes and networks through which it is made, including, of course, designers, models, tools, and users. So may this award encourage our esteemed colleague to continue the inspiring work for which she is so widely known. And I will end with a reference to Mark Cousins himself from his penultimate legendary Friday lecture, and I quote, "It is all right if you value ideas. Go ahead and quickly have one. But after 5 minutes, start studying. You might think it's odd to advocate study without grounding it in a purely conceptual or intellectual framework. So is the point of all these study to have ideas? No, it's not," says Cousins. "The point of study is to study more," end quote. And with that, we've come full circle by anachronically, as it were, addressing Masumi's concern from the outset. Without further ado, I give the floor, or actually the screen in this case, to the recipient on the 2025 Digital Futures Mark Cousins Theory Award, Professor Albena Yaneva. Thank you very much. I will now.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrej. Thank you, Neil, Dulmini, and the whole team of Digital Futures for this prestigious award. I'm very honored to have it. I'm very pleased also with your introduction, Andrej, and your words mean a lot to me. So I'll definitely consider this award as an encouragement to continue to go in depth into ideas and to develop them further. So in my very short presentation, I would like to talk about some of the guns that you mentioned. I will share my screen. And the title I have chosen, the generic title for the guns I have chosen is Architecture in the Making. So I was initially trained in anthropology and sociology, and my approach is entirely inspired by pragmatist thinkers like William James, John Dewey, but also the French pragmatists, Gabriel Tarde, Gilbert Simondon, Gilles Deleuze, and of course Bruno Latour, my late mentor. My work is driven by the ambition to understand and unpack the current conditions of architectural practice, and to engage in a critique, in a kind of critique of design, but from within the field of practice, by paying close attention to the process, to the materials, the ontology, the different scales, and the politics of design. So over the past 20 or 25 years, I have collaborated with different offices, and I have studied their work, offices like OMA, Moshe Safdie, architects, Rudolf Prohaska, Alvaro Siza, to just mention a few of the architects I had the pleasure to work with and learn from. So these different practitioners were fascinating for me, because I was always interested in studying the practice and the beliefs of professional designers. Very often I was quite intrigued by their strange obsession with time, novelty, and innovation. Their enigmatic attachments to models, sketches, and different drawing software also puzzled me. And I wanted also to understand the extraordinary inconsistency in how they define themselves and their practice. So questioning what matters to architects and designers and what truly defines their worlds, I have developed a sociology-inspired pragmatist approach to design, which is very different in a way that the existing critical theory-inspired approaches or critical framings of design and architectural production. So a pragmatist approach looks at architecture in the making, not at the static product of architectural work, and is based on what architects and dwellers do, on the pragmatic content of their actions, the actions they undertake and assume, rather than the theories and the ideologies of practitioners. And to illustrate this approach, I will use 4 exemplars from my work, 4 small guns that illustrate architecture in the making. So the first one is designing. Designing takes us in the office of Metropolitan Architecture in Rotterdam. This was my very first study of architects at work, conducted between 2001 and 2004. And while design has been the subject of multiple studies, architectural scholars have rarely touched on the contingency and the process of designing as key for understanding how buildings, cities, and environments come into being. So to grasp the meaning of oil-made buildings, for instance, and Koolhaas's architecture, we need to forget for a while, for at least for a little bit, the star architect and what's in his mind, and this kind of idea that it's all in the mind of the creator and the impact on his creative ideas. We need also to forget the buildings and the great achievements of the architect and turn away from official interpretations. This means to circumvent traditional understandings of star authorship in the spirit of subjectivist interpretations. It's all about the great mind of the creator. And it also means to circumvent critical studies in the spirit of critical historical interpretations of the buildings, referring to historical context, social, political factors that might explain the final buildings or master plans or ideas. Instead, an alternative approach is to follow the models. The foam materials, the tools, the technologies, the software, and all this technologies that architects mobilize to design, to think, and to create new ideas. And that's what I decided to do. That was my approach, to follow the models and the technologies in the office of Metropolitan Architecture, but to also to trace the entangled networks of designers, clients, professional model makers, and interior designers in the practice, to trace the trajectories of both humans and non-humans. And of course, this meant counting for the ordinary forces and conditions of design practice, following all designers in the office, their routines, mistakes, and workaday choices. Thus, from the incidental accounts of design as product, I shifted the attention to design as practice, from buildings as static objects to buildings as uncertain and contested moving targets. Second, archiving. Archiving takes us to the Canadian Centre of Architecture, where I conducted a project, again, an ethnographic observation between 2015 and 2018. While the fate of established archives has been the subject of multiple studies in architecture, Architectural scholars have rarely touched on the mechanisms of constructing archives and the process of archiving as key for understanding how historical sources in architecture are established. A pragmatist approach to archiving aims at understanding how mundane architecture objects become archival by scrutinizing the specific mechanisms of production of archives in design practice. So I decided first to look at architecture offices with established practice of archiving. For instance, this is Alvaro Siza's office and his archivist, and to see in the practice how archiving connects to designing, and to understand how architecture archives are assembled to reflect the nature of design as a heterogeneous and social process. So following the work of architects and archivists together, I was able to examine different situated and local practices of archiving, arranging, cataloging, numbering, taking care of objects like repairing and maintaining different archival objects in architecture offices and in collecting institutions. So this is the Canadian Centre of Architecture, where we see the conservation lab and the vaults, the archivist offices, where all these archiving operations are performed. And I was able to trace, to see in a way how all these operations, archiving operations, happen to produce larger structuring effects in architectural collections. Thus, from the incidental accounts of archives as sources, I suggested shifting the attention to archives as practice and practices, from collections as sites of enduring historical evidence to collections as sites of epistemological reshuffle. 3, dwelling. Dwelling takes us to the National Graphene Institute in Manchester, where I worked for a while for the university. And between 2007 and 2009, I had the chance to follow the design of a new building dedicated to graphene research. So dwelling is the activity of world making through active participation in the shaping of material form. The dwelling practices I was able to follow happened in a scientific building. So it's a very specific type of dwelling in a scientific lab. So while science buildings have been largely explored in the past 3 decades, existing research still focused either on the technical side of the design labs, like efficiency and sustainability of the labs, or the purely human interface, the identity of scientists. Yet how technical and human aspects tangle in everyday lab dwelling remains largely unexplored. So this is the Graphene Institute, and I was really intrigued to understand how scientists work and dwell in this highly complex building. So I followed simultaneously the design infrastructure that makes a science lab possible. And these are the gas rooms, the gray spaces, the utility blocks, the mechanical workshops, and the human experiences they facilitate. By so doing, I was able to grasp the quality and variability of the different type of experiences facilitated by the building, following different dwellers, how they speed up and engage in competitive graphene research, but also how they slow down in the building and engage in different discussions. to witness also various instrumental practices, the lost track of time, the intensity of communication, and the different spatial choreographies. Thus, from the incidental accounts of use and users, still considered very much in functionalistic terms in the field, I suggested shifting the attention to using, dwelling as a process, as special practice, as being also key for understanding how buildings work, and in particular, this generation of 21st century science labs. And finally, exhibiting architecture takes us to Venice. This is my most recent project, conducted between 2024 and 2026, so it's still ongoing. Exhibiting architecture allows us to trace the process of planning, curating, and staging the 19th edition of the Architecture Biennale in Venice, called Intelligence. While historical accounts of the Biennale typically engage with the curatorial teams, and the transformative agency of the event, after the dust has settled down, I decided to place myself into the heart of the Biennale drama and follow the development of the project from the start, from the very beginning of the curatorial work back in July 2024. That's when the project started. And from there, from the heart of the drama, I began to unravel the complexity of a Biennale making as a kind of mega architectural project. The key question I had was, who are the other actors? Because we only talk about the curator and the autonomy of the curator, the creative authorship of this single individual, the curator, the chief curator, but we forget all about the other actors, I suggested shifting the attention from the Biennale as an agent of discourse, canonizing the key authorship of this chief curator towards the conceptual and technical work of a large crowd of protagonists, and we can see some of them on these slides: curatorial assistants, exhibition and graphic designers, and their teams, editors, production and public program coordinators, the Biennale staff, 130 people working on each Biennale, each edition of the Biennale, exhibitors, and the many different local entities in Venice, which are also involved in the Biennale event. I was able to interview and trace the activities of many of those protagonists on different sites and engage in the complexity of their work, as well as follow some interesting debates around the politics of space as the exhibition took shape. Concluding, in all these settings, or examples of architecture in the making, we witness how architecture is far from being a projection of society, a static object that could reflect social, economic, or political forces, but it rather becomes a dense network of relationships. When we follow architects at work, curators at work, archivists at work, and many different formats of architectural practices, we engage with a dense network, socio-material network of agents, rather than having this distinct duality between society and architecture. So a pragmatist perspective acknowledges all unsung heroes, we might say: the young designers, the foam and the foam cutter, in the architectural practice of a star architect, not just the star architect, the conservators catalogos, solvents, and spatulas in an archive, not just the chief curator or architect, the lab technicians, the gas cylinders, and lab supporters in a scientific lab, not just the Nobel Prize, scientist or architect, the curatorial assistants, not just the chief curator in the Biennale or the president of the Biennale. So this approach enables us to account all sorts of practical work contributing to the making of architectural knowledge. Redirecting attention from the typical heroic figure of the single architect, curator, single author, which appeared in many different forms in these examples, still so present in the myths that sustain the cultural consumption of architecture today, towards the situated social and material practices of designers will gradually open up new avenues for understanding the current conditions of architectural practice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Albena. It was fantastic. I invite everybody to maybe turn on their cameras in case we want to follow it up with a quick question. I mean, it was beautifully structured. The four guns, as it were, it makes so much sense to me. Does anybody have an immediate response?
Maybe just a quick suggestion. I think the work with Koolhaas is really super interesting. There is one particular individual who used to work for Rem Koolhaas, who got so frustrated with this kind of long process of design, very wasteful in many ways, actually, and dependent on interns doing a lot of work for very little money, that she set up her own company to try and find a better way of doing things. And this is Wan Yu He, who is the CEO of XCool. XCool means X-Koolhaas. Now, what is interesting about that is, of course, that AI, for all its problems and so on, is all based on data. It's all based on an archive in a certain sort of way. And one of the things that they've done is to try and speed up the process, to use AI to speed up the process. This is what Foster and Partners are interested in doing, speeding up the process, to the point they managed to design and construct a series of hotels in China in 16 weeks. And I just think this could be a wonderful focus of your work, to engage with this emerging domain, full of its problems, but to have a kind of sociological eye to do this kind of thing. And I thought the work was hugely Benjaminian in a certain sense. Like Walter Benjamin was talking about not celebrating the famous people, but redeeming the buried fragments of those who were crushed by history. So I think it's got an enormous contribution, and I would love to see what you make of the world of AI and its contribution to architecture as well. Thank you. Thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, I followed a little bit this practice, actually, which I learned about the XCool from your book on AI and the connection to Koolhaas as well. And this is a wonderful project for the new generation of architectural theorists, anthropologists, sociologists, to see the effects of these new technologies on practice in the same way as I have done the analysis on the model, like this very simple and almost obsolete models that the form models that Koolhaas is using. And now we have the opposite. 20 years later, we have this kind of sophisticated technologies, very much in a way endorsed by progressive architects, but also given the skepticism that AI has faced at the very start, including by some professionals and, of course, the public opinion and all the criticism on the ethical and environmental impact. So these are very interesting controversies, and to see how they really are enacted at the level of the practice, to see the difference between small-scale practices and progressive practices who have their own think tanks and research groups working on these technologies and advancing these technologies, as opposed to the small-scale practices around the world which consume those tools but cannot develop them further. I think this kind of differences at the level of the practice are quite interesting to capture and to investigate from within, from the level of processes and specific projects develop at different scales of practices indeed. Yeah.
Dulmini, anybody wants to ask? If not, I have a question, perhaps, if I may. Everybody is paying lip service to transdisciplinary projects, but very few actually manage to pull it off, as you do. And I had this experience. We organized a transdisciplinary conference called the Critical and Clinical Cartographies, where we brought together people to discuss the similarities and differences between pedagogies in medicine and in architecture, because it turns out we are using very similar tools nowadays. And it reminded me of something that I've learned from your work, that it is not sufficient to just go in and out. You need to be embedded sufficiently long, long enough, so that the people around you feel, as it were, relaxed, and then it's only at that point that they start sharing knowledge that they themselves might not be completely conscious of. And I was taken aback by a particular case where a certain person has figured out that in conversations, and again, after many weeks, they realized that for a surgeon to be able to tell whether they are cutting the right chord, it was all dependent on the sound rather than the haptic, tactile feeling. So teasing out these things, it seems to me that this is what you've been doing all along in your practice.
Absolutely, yeah. And I have been very lucky to actually have practitioners who are open to this observation, because this is extremely difficult for an anthropologist and sociologist at the start to get accepted by, I would say, the natives, but
Yes.
I'm now part of the natives, and to be open to share information. So I had, of course, throughout the years, also different reactions to this anthropological and sociological approach. Some doors have been closed deliberately. Some architects were not willing to to be observed and only wanted to give official interviews or official statements. To also show me the projects and the visuals that they will only show to, let's say, the press. But there was some kind of nervousness to reveal behind the scenes and the messiness of the process, which was definitely an obstacle, a challenge, but also something that with the years I have seen that this kind of attitude has changed, perhaps because of the perception of interdisciplinarity, as you're saying, or transdisciplinarity, which is enacted in much more, in a way, subtle forms in the discipline now, in many different formats, from studio teaching to the kind of official discussions in lecture series. Transdisciplinarity is something that now takes different forms than 20 years ago, and it was probably an interesting statement, but definitely not something that we could easily translate in practice. And I also see the reaction of the many students I have worked throughout the years. There's some degree of excitement when we bring methods from other disciplines, as you were saying, whether it's medical research or anthropology, architectural students are quite receptive and quite excited about these ideas, because they could see a kind of spatial choreography of ideas that come from other disciplines. They can translate them in a much more fresh way than sociologists could do. So I actually have learned much more about society and the social from designers and from their interpretations of interdisciplinarity than I could learn from sociologists, which is my initial field before I started this huge experimentation 20 years ago. So that's perhaps a moment to thank all the students I have worked with in the Manchester School of Architecture, now Torino, Columbia University and Princeton, because they have been quite courageous in a way to participate in this sociological and anthropological experiments.
Very sweet of you. Thanks. Very kind. We have Gustav. Do you have any questions still?
Well, maybe Andrej, if I could possibly ask a brief question. Well, first of all, thank you, Albena, for the wonderful presentation. Thank you also, Andrej, for the great introduction. It was amazing. I really enjoyed it. It's just a brief follow-up question. Basically, Albena, you touched upon it already, and I think Andrej as well. I was wondering, this applies somewhat to my current context. I was wondering, how has this work in a way perhaps changed or also formed your way of specifically perhaps working with PhD students, PhD supervisions, and let's say the integration of unconventional methods or unconventional research findings. As you were saying, it has, I gather, also like informed your own work, of course. But I wonder, how has that dynamic perhaps shifted also through, especially through this research and work? I'd be very interested in that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I have continued, in a way, I have implemented very similar kind of interdisciplinary approach in the PhD programs, I have thought, by mainly focusing on methodologies and writing tactics, because I think architectural scholars are very quick in terms of grasping ideas and understanding and contrasting ideas. But how these ideas materialize in writing an article or a dissertation, that's where perhaps the knowledge of social sciences could help, but again, in a kind of creative dialogue with the design creativity. And for me, the interesting kind of aspect was to find ways to talk about methods in an intriguing way, in an experimental way, so that my students could be engage and could be passionate about trying some of those methods in their fieldwork, explaining what fieldwork means and the skills, and prepare them for the kind of the art of conducting fieldwork, and then writing and enjoying to write. It's something that a lot of young scholars struggle, especially academic writing. In all disciplines, I would say, doesn't matter the kind of disciplinary background, but my approach has been to experiment with different writing techniques, even playful. I run a workshop which is called a writing atelier, where students bring one page in response to a very short brief, and it could be one descriptive page. Let's say if we talk about because we mentioned Latour and technical mediation, if we talk about technical objects and what objects do in social life, yeah, let's not dwell on the theories. Yeah, we can quickly bring lots of theories and quote them and put them in dialogue. Let's see what this means at the level of practice. And then students will go and will reflect on what objects do in social life by bringing one descriptive page to describe the interaction with an object or with a simple technology. It could be your iPhone, or it could be that you're struggling with your coffee mug, or a very simple mundane object, and reflecting on this interaction, describing and unpacking the agency of objects in real life, in mundane situations, and then bringing this one page in class, where everyone will read out loud this one page and will discuss the different theories, like implicit theories that could be inscribed in writing, how description also makes an argument. It's not innocent, it's not passive. And then we'll make careful dissection of the different arguments, the narrative strategies. And this becomes a very playful exercise where everyone brings a page and then discusses and reads this page in class, but it brings lots of new skills to the students. So I use this kind of methods, in a way borrowed from anthropology and sociology, but translated for design education to experiment with different writing techniques, methodological tactics in a way to be able to make students more sensitive to this approach. And finally, to make them enjoy doing research and writing. I think that's the key thing, really. If they enjoy it, they will do a great work afterwards. I think it kind of relates to the question.
I was just going to say that you have actually
yeah.
answered the question in the chat from Gustavo. Absolutely. And now there's a follow-up question, but I can't help myself but to say it seems to me like what you're describing is also the description of affordances rather than objects. I'm a Gibsonian, so I had to dig it in.
Yeah, in some situations we can end up describing affordances. In other situations we can end up describing mediation, how technical objects or daily objects in a way facilitate social interaction and make us do things, the faire. And different, of course, this could be also put in dialogue with different theories, as you were saying, affordance, or different thinkers. So from the description, of course, we go back to theory. So it's this dialogue between theory and practice that is extremely important, which I think what Gustavo was saying, that how can a new generation of architects and designers start the path of philosophical and theoretical investigation? For me, philosophy and theory are not there to be enjoyed like a beautiful aesthetic framework for our thinking, but we read philosophers in order to learn from the intelligence of the philosophers and bring this in our empirical work as a way that this can, as a set of lenses that could help us to understand the intelligence of our actors. So the intelligence of the philosophers help us to understand what we see on the ground, help us to understand what our actors are telling you, what designers or architects, archivists are telling us, how they understand the world, to understand what they say and do, the discourse, but also the non-discursive actions, the body language, the mediations that we see actually when we observe, because my methods are mainly observational, ethnographic methods. This is knowledge, and in order to fully grasp this, we need the intelligence of the philosophers, not as a set of beautiful concepts, but as a set of methodological tactics or sensitivity that we develop in philosophy, and we bring it in different empirical settings to understand actual problems and design phenomena, be this AI or the climate crisis or the kind of current problems that the discipline is trying to cope, to resolve any of those problems. We're not fully prepared to resolve any of those problems if we haven't learned from philosophy, theory, cultural theory, and we can continue, of course, the list.
I do have a question, because you were talking about, and thank you very much for that really exciting presentation. And for being, I think, one of the pioneers of actually bringing in this whole kind of ontological turn and Latour's work to architecture, and that was, such a big thing at that point in time. And I think my question relates to that in a way. So I think now there are a lot of people talking about it, and I guess not only Latour's work, but many other anthropologists and their work have been discussed. So I'm just curious to know what you think has happened in these years and where you think Latour's work is now. And are there any other thinkers or anthropologists that you think we should sort of start looking into?
Yeah, thank you, Dulmini. That's a great question. So, well, I actually have been asking myself at the very start, this was like 25 years ago, why is this not so popular? Why is it that I'm so passionate about these ideas, but the discipline is quite skeptic, which there was a certain skepticism, at the time. Of course, relational thinking has, in a lot of relational thinkers have written a lot, like we have, of course, the work of Isabel Stengers and Peter Sloterdijk in Europe, and then, of course, we have Donna Haraway and Singh, and there was a lot has happened in the past 20-25 years, not just in continental philosophy, in the kind of small world of continental philosophy and anthropology and social thinking, but in the wider kind of Anglo-Saxon universe, where we have seen some of those ideas being developed maybe in a kind of context that are much more relatable to us in the field of architecture. And then 20 years later, we see this is a kind of dominant way of thinking. Everyone is talking about post-humanism, about relational thinking and pragmatism in one or another way, maybe not having the same references. But what has happened is that also the world has evolved so much. We have been through COVID, we have been through many other disasters where we have actually witnessed the agency of non-humans, and we have witnessed a lot of non-humans and technological settings becoming more powerful than us, than humans. So we in a way suffered from this post-humanist moment as well, and we became much more, in a way, sensitive to these ideas as a field. And of course, this is a long answer. There are many other factors, of course, which can explain why this kind of thinking is more relevant. And of course, it's not Latour. Latour follows on the French pragmatists, who follow on the American pragmatists. So that we have all this big group of thinkers, from Dewey to Tard, and of course Deleuze is very present and influencing, of course, architectural discourse. But Latour was able to kind of ground this discourse in specific material settings, in technological and material, in a way, formats that were closer to architecture. And it's not by chance that we have seen in the past 20-25 years, architects and designers in a way gaining kind of that these ideas in a way gain more popularity among architects and designers, not just as ideas but also as methods.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. On that note, I think you've been very generous with your time, and thank you so much, Albena. It was such a pleasure, and we hope that our paths will intersect yet again in the near future. I thank the jury, everybody, and that's it for today. Thank you very much.
I thank you. I thank you for the award.